If you were in the Beirut explosion on August 4th, 2020, knowing this one thing could save your life. So let's go. Hey, my name is Dr. Tan with the Survival Doctors, giving you the best tips, tricks, and strategies to overcome illness and injury in survival situations. So if you're new here and you want to know how to manage medical emergencies when shit does hit the fan and the gear that you'll need, consider subscribing. And at any point in the video, go ahead and check out our show notes for the details and additional resources. Plus, if you stay until the end, I'll have a surprise just for you. So today, we are talking about the explosion in Beirut on August 4th, 2020. Because many were killed and thousands were injured. Hospitals are currently overwhelmed, leaving people on the streets to care for themselves. So today we're talking about massive uncontrolled bleeding from extremities, your hands and feet, because those injuries kill you fast. So let me show you the basics of tourniquet use and improvised tourniquets. So if this ever happens to you or someone who you love, you can act fast to save their lives and your life. You might not agree with everything here, but these guidelines are from the Tactical Combat Casualty Care TCCC 2019 guidelines. So if you have any objections or questions, just let us know in the comments below and we'll discuss it. So number one, tourniquets are the first line therapy for uncontrolled massive hemorrhage. So when we're thinking about massive bleeds or hemorrhage, we're thinking about arterial, it's squirting, venous, where it's kind of oozing, but oozing at a very fast rate. And lastly, complex wounds. We're talking about blast injuries with multiple exits and entry wounds. We're talking about mangled extremities from explosions, from improvised devices, high caliber rounds, and also partial and complete amputation. So that's a whole different beast on its own, and we'll go into it in regards to tourniquet use. And number two, uncontrolled bleeds. So what I mean with uncontrolled bleeds, you are putting pressure with a gauze for 2 to 3 minutes and it's still soaking through. So at that point, you're thinking about getting your tourniquet ready. So first thing is scene safety. Things to think about: is the danger still going on? Are there still explosions? Are there still wildfires? Are we taking active fire? And with the patient, do you see blood squirting out? That kind of changes the pace and what you do. And in these situations, sometimes the number one priority is getting out of there. So in that case, the TCCC 2019 guidelines still state when you're in that situation where the scene's unsafe, or if the provider, if you've never put on a tourniquet before, you don't remember any of the guidelines, you can go high and tight up near the armpit or up near the groin on the legs and then tighten that down. And the reason why we do that is because in those situations, we're trying to get you out of there as soon as possible. And we don't have time to kind of fully expose the wound to kind of see what's going on under there. But let's walk through the whole situation. So let's kind of visualize this. We're walking onto the scene at the Beirut explosion. We see multiple people on the floor. So what you do is you go there, and typically you think about your ABCs, but in these specific situations where bleeds can be your number one killer, you go for bleeds first. And in the military and combat roles, we go from march, M meaning massive hemorrhage, first. So you do a quick sweep on the body, see if there's anything soaked on your gloved hands with blood. So once you identify an area with blood, you take out your trauma shears or something to cut and expose that wound like this, and you cut, and then you kind of fully expose it all the way up to the armpit to see what's going on. Once you do that, you're putting direct pressure on that wound. So if you have some gauze, that's great. You can also bundle up clothes and push on that wound, waiting 2 to 3 minutes. And while you're doing that, think in your head, do I need a tourniquet in this situation? Is blood soaking through the bandage despite pressure? So you expose the area, you've put direct pressure, it's bleeding through the gauze, so you need a tourniquet. So for position, you want to place it 2 to 3 inches above the wound. So once you visualize that wound that continues to bleed, you place that tourniquet 2 to 3 inches above that wound, about 4 fingers width. So just like that. So if the wound's over here, 4 fingers above that, you put the tourniquet there, you wrench it down, and then we'll go through it. So tell me right now, is this different from what you've used in the past or what you've been taught? Let me know in the comments, because there is inconsistency with civilian versus military versus even local practices in EMS services. So what do you guys do? What did you guys get taught? And what do you teach as possible instructors out there? So one important thing to know after it's 2 to 3 inches above the wound is how you load it. So I always have mine already ready to go. So let's say it's a forearm injury. I'll just place it right over here above the elbow and then tighten it. And this is on skin. on skin. So let me take this off for you. So let's say it's in the forearm, we go fingers above. My tourniquet is already loaded, ready to go. I place it on the forearm, tighten it down as tight as it goes. The tail is towards the body. So if I'm doing it solo, I can wrench it on myself. I place the Velcro, make sure it's secure, and then we tighten. I'm not gonna fully tighten over here because I need to teach. And you tighten this until the bleeding stops. Once the bleeding stops, you secure it over here and you double check. Number one thing that you have to do is make sure the bleed stops and there's no pulse. So this is something that many people forget. You don't want to just stop the bleed, you also want to stop the pulse. So you tighten it, the bleeding stops, you secure it, and then you check the pulse. If the pulse is no longer there, then you're good to go. And make sure you're writing down the time so we know how long that tourniquet's been put on. And we want that tourniquet that tight to stop the bleed and the pulse, because we are worried if we stop only the venous return but let the arterial flow to go in, what happens is your extremity becomes a balloon with a one-way valve, and that causes compartment syndrome and further damage. It does not help. Especially if you're bleeding from an arterial source, you're not stopping that bleed. But let's say you do everything right, there's no pulse, there's no bleeding, and then all of a sudden it starts re-bleeding. Another thing you can do is you can put a second tourniquet above that first one. And same kind of deal, tight with the Velcro, secured, tighten that, secure it with the Velcro, and then write the time as well. And again, no pulse, no bleed. So you got two tourniquets on there. Writing down the time is so important because we don't want the tourniquet on for more than 6 hours. Ideally, thinking about transitioning to a hemostatic or a pressure dressing within 2 hours. So if you want to learn how to transition from a tourniquet to a hemostatic or a pressure dressing, click the subscribe button right now because that will be one of our future videos. So if you have any questions about going high and tight versus 2 to 3 inches above, arteries retracting, tourniquets below the elbow and below the knee, the timing of 2 hours and 6 hours, or why these recommendations are even favored, go ahead and subscribe now because we are doing a deep dive in our next video. So the next question you have is like, hey, good, I have my own personal first aid kit or trauma kit, I have 2 tourniquets, a few gauze, and I'm good to go for my personal gear. But what if we go to a situation where we're walking in Beirut, Lebanon, and this explosion happens? My family, multiple people are hurt and around me and are bleeding out. What do I do in that situation? So if you know how to use a tourniquet, that's great, and you only have 2, which means you can possibly help 1 or 2 people. So it is important to know how to properly put pressure on the wound for 2 to 3 minutes, but also in your back mind thinking, what can I use for a tourniquet? So let's go over some improvised tourniquets. And I want to focus on the characteristics of our gold standard North American Rescue CAT Gen 7 tourniquet. So this is the same tourniquet that's provided to the US military. So North American Rescue CAT tourniquet Generation 7 should have a barcode like this with a serial ID. And if you look at the plastic part over here, you'll see that too. First thing to notice about a tourniquet is its width. That's 1.5 inches at least. And the newer ones are going even wider. And the purpose of that is it provides more compression of the vessel. Think about pinching a straw versus compressing it between your palms. There's going to be less flow if you do that full compression on a long length of vessel. Other things to notice about real tourniquets, if you look on the inseam, you can feel and see the belt that goes through the whole length of the tourniquet. The cheaper ones, the belt does not go all the way through, or you'll feel endpoints in it. So you know this is a real one by the barcodes, both on the plastic, on the belt itself, and buying directly from North American Rescue, whether that's on Amazon or directly from the website. And I'll put the link in the description for you guys. So the CAT tourniquet Generation 7 is large and fits around my belly. So that's how long or how thick of a thigh you can put it across. So if you want a halfway decent improvised tourniquet, it should have very similar characteristics to a proper tourniquet. Number one, you should have the ability to tighten it. So you'll need a windlass, just like this rod, a area or a mechanism to secure it, and also a material that tightens. So number one, the width. It has to be at least 1.5 inches. And typically when you're using improvised materials, I like going a little wider because as soon as you start wrenching down on that material, that material gets thinner, and the thinner it is, the less effective it is at stopping the blood flow, and it increases your chance of causing tissue injury. So things like shoelaces, paracord, number one, it causes injury. Number two, it's not good at stopping the blood flow, so don't use that. Use something that's at least 1.5 centimeters wide. I go wider, 4 fingers length. Same thing for a measurement above the wound. I just use that to measure out the material that I cut. So people who use their belts, no go. Leather belts, these other belts, they don't have a good mechanisms to tighten it. So a lot of people, that's their go-to, they whip it off their waist. Do not make that mistake. Next, you want a windlass, just like this sturdy plastic rod. And in addition to that, you want some kind of mechanism to secure that windlass in place so it's not whipping around. And lastly, in your mind, I want you to be thinking about what you can do to make that second tourniquet if the first one fails. So let me know in the comments below, if you were to stumble upon a scene like the Beirut explosions with a bunch of people bleeding on the street, what would you use? And if you're getting value from this, learning some new things, let me know in the comments below, like this video, tell me what new things that you learned from this video. Next, I want to share with you what I would do in that situation if I was a tourist or something like that and I stumbled upon this mass casualty situation. So in my mind, if I had my personal trauma kit, I would save it for myself. Number one, scene safety and making sure if anything happened to you, you would be safe. In that situation, you don't know if the explosions are still going on. So after that first wave, I don't know if there's going to be a second one. So if I only have one tourniquet, one combat gauze, one pressure dressing, I'm going to save that for my personal kit if I need self-rescue. And when you're there, you want to think about what you can use for every single patient over and over again. What are some reliable sources that you will always or almost always find on someone? So number one, a t-shirt, and number two, 2 shoes. So I'm going to show you how I would make a tourniquet with a t-shirt and shoes. Number one, you have your trauma shears. First thing I would do when I'm making that tourniquet is to get the material for the tourniquet. So you're measuring about 4 fingers length of width. I'm very approximate. I go in, and if you're using anything sharp, even scissors, you don't want to be cutting in, you want to be cutting out. And you want your lines to go across this way, especially for cotton t-shirts, because when you rip it, it'll come out in a strip, and it's very easy to make that tourniquet. So you have that horizontal slit, and then pull. So see what I mean? The initial cut was well more than 4 fingers length. So the front part is wide, but there's areas where it's quite thin, an inch, maybe less. Another tip, when you're cutting horizontally, you might want to cut the sides first and then rip through. You might have more of an even length if you do that. And next, you have a shoe. Most patients will be wearing a shoe. Preferably you want something with a shoelace, because this both has your windlass and a mechanism to secure it, your shoelace. So what I do, I untie the shoe, pull it tight, and then we can start using this as your windlass. So what's going to happen is you'll make that knot, that first knot with your shirt, put the shoe on top of it, make a knot on the top, and then another one, and then start wrenching it down. So let's do that. So let's pretend we're putting the tourniquet above the knee. Doing that one loop. I like doing a second loop so there's a friction knot there. Do it tight, and when you're putting your shoe, you want the shoelace facing down, and you put this down over here. You tie your second knot on top of the shoe, and then you tie a knot on top of that as well. That makes a square knot. Now you want to tighten this as tight as you can, and again, you're doing it till you stop the bleed. And so if you look at the bone on your toe side, you want to go behind that and feel your pulse there. So if you feel a pulse, it's not tight enough. So check this area out over here. Even though we started with almost 4 fingers widths, look how thin that got. So this is about 1.5 inches from that 4 fingers length. That's why I like cutting it a little wider at first. So you're wrenching it tight, and then you're keeping a mind of where your shoelaces are, because your shoelace, that's what's going to hold things in place. So you stop the bleed and you stop the pulse. Next thing you want to do is secure that tourniquet in place. So use the shoelace to secure the tourniquet in place by putting it under the tourniquet and then over the shoe on either end. And you want to tie it off with a square knot. And you want to tie it off with a square knot so it's not moving around. Additionally, you can also use other shoelace to secure the other side. And while you're doing that, you're just holding it in place. This is a huge object that you can easily manipulate with one hand quite easily. So one thing to note, when you're building this tourniquet, you want a buddy or someone being able to put pressure on that wound while you work on this. You don't want that patient to bleed out while you're making a tourniquet. So that person is putting pressure while you're doing this. So if you thought that was helpful, please like, share, and comment yes below. And if you're on Instagram, take a screenshot of your favorite part of the video and tag @survival.doctors on your stories. We'd love to give you a shout out and connect with you. And now for the surprise you've all been waiting for, our trauma kit giveaway. So we're giving away this $70 trauma kit. So if you want this trauma kit, check out the link in the descriptions. And if you're watching this now and the giveaway is over, no worries, tag us on Instagram and ask when our next giveaway is. So one more piece of exciting news for you guys. We are working with North American Rescue, which is the same company that provides the standard issue tourniquets, the CAT Gen 7, to our US American Army. So check out their website. I'll put the link in the descriptions. Let me know what you want so we can put it in our next giveaway. And in the future, we are gonna have custom survival and trauma kits just for you. Coming up next, we are doing a deep dive in the recommendations and the design behind tourniquets, so you will be best equipped to survive a prolonged extraction with limited resources. See you guys there.